In today's video, I'm going to show you how to bring an animated camera from Unreal Engine into Adobe After Effects. Before we get started, it is worth mentioning that I'm using a paid plugin either using Cinema4D or Blender for this workflow. It will save you a ton of time using the plugin, so I do recommend picking it up. It is also worth mentioning that I am not sponsored by either of these. It just saves me a lot of time, and I'd rather save time getting it to work rather than trying to spend a bunch of time doing the free way when I could just spend a little bit of money and save myself some headache. So with that out of the way, let's dive into Unreal Engine and learn how to do this After Effects Unreal Engine workflow thing. In Unreal Engine 5, I have this scene here with my portal, my VFX, everything's pretty much done. I need to get this camera right here into some 3D software so then I can bring it into After Effects. First off, we need to identify that I have 3 keyframes and some camera shake. If you were to try and do this with the camera as is, with just these keyframes, it will not work. So what we have to do is we have to bake this camera. To do that, what we're going to do is we're going to basically duplicate the camera by hitting Control D, and it's going to ask us, should we duplicate this actor? We're just going to hit yes. We're going to make a new version of this camera, and we will call this cam 001_tut. Just like that. So now I have this camera right here. The next thing we have to do is we also want to make sure that our camera cut in our level sequence also matches this new camera because we are going to be baking it. So let's just set it right there. And the reason why we're doing it this way is because we have this camera shake on this camera. If we don't match it, then the camera shake might be different between the different cameras. So we want to make sure that everything is consistent. So with this new camera, what we're going to do is we're going to select this, and we're going to go up to the little wrench and bake transform. Click, and then we're going to see this window pop up. We want to make sure that we bake all keyframes. So every little camera shake, every little moment that this camera is in the scene, we want that. Click OK. So now it's going to make a new track for us under that new camera tut, and we have 2 transforms. We're going to right click on the first transform with the old keyframes and mute it. We don't want them. We could very well delete them if we don't need it. Now we're going to make sure that we're looking through our camera by selecting this little white camera icon, and then we're going to play it back, make sure that everything looks good. You shouldn't have any issues trying to bake this camera, but we want to make sure that we are using this new baked camera. With all that done, now what we're going to do is we're going to select this camera, and if you're trying to do any VFX compositing sort of things, we want to make sure that if we're projecting footage, we want to select the object in our scene in which footage is going to be projected on. So with that, we need to find the plain portal object behind this. So I'm just going to not select the Niagara, not select the Embergen stuff. I want this object right here, this plain portal. And we can see that we have it selected in our level sequencer down here. This is what I want because we're going to try and project some footage onto this. So I'm going to select this object, and then I'm going to scroll up to my camera tut, Control, and select that as well. And the reason why we select both of them is we don't want to export everything from our scene, just these 2 objects. We're going to right click on this and go to export, and it's going to ask us where do we want to export it. I have this folder right here in my FBX elements folder. I would just call this scene 01 camera tutorial VFX portal. Sure, just like that. I know there's a lot of stuff in here, but hit save. You're going to see the, hey, what FBX stuff do we want to export? I don't touch any of this. You might need to do some flipping here. If this workflow is being challenging for you, you might want to try checking force front x-axis. But if you do it this way and you follow the steps in this tutorial, you should be fine. Don't mess with anything. Reset to default. Hit export. Now that's done, we need to dive into some 3D software. Now before we do dive into Cinema4D or Blender for the camera animation transfer into After Effects, we need to render out this scene with the camera animation baked down, ready to go. We're going to hit the clapboard right here to jump into our render settings. Now if you don't know how to render in Unreal Engine, I do recommend following this video. It's one of my other videos that learns more about the intricacies of Unreal Engine rendering. I'm going to select my settings right here, and I have everything pretty much set. I'm going to run through this really quick. First, you must render in EXRs, and the reason why is if you're trying to get the highest quality possible out of Unreal Engine, you need to use EXRs. If you're going to be doing anything more advanced compositing wise, such as crypto mats and multi-layers, you're basically trying to put footage into your scene like this example that we're creating. You must render in the PIS format because it has more information in the actual file. So make sure that your compression is set to PIS. These will be very large, and you also have to make sure that multi-layer is checked. Next, we have to go to our renderer right here, and we have our deferred rendering, which is going to do the EXR sequence. But we're going to go up to our settings right here, and we're going to go to Object IDs Limited, and make sure that we select this. This is under the rendering tab, and we're going to render out full crypto mats, and we are also going to include translucent objects, which is going to be the particles that are in this scene. Now, if you do not see this option right here, you must go up to your settings, plugins. You're going to scroll over and you're going to type in crypto mat, movie render queue, additional render passes. You must make sure that this is enabled to find your object IDs. If it's not there, you're not going to see it, and you're going to be like, why is Jags telling me this? You must have this plugin installed. It is free. It's in the engine. It's just not enabled by default. We're going to close this. Then with object IDs there, we should be good to go. For your anti-aliasing settings for this scene, I'm going to set my spatial count to 1, and just for this tutorial, I'll set this to 8, so this renders pretty quickly. Override your anti-aliasing, that's just a must if you have more than 8 samples, or exactly 8, and we must set our anti-aliasing mode to none. We're going to make sure that we check render warm-up frames, and we're going to set our render warm-up count and our engine warm-up count to 240. That's basically going to preload the engine and all the stuff in our scene, like these particles here, so we get less flickering and weird artifacty things. Our color output, again, if you want to follow more render settings, you can follow my tutorials up here. I'm using the ACES workflow, which we'll cover in just a second. Our console variables, we're going to make sure that we have none for this. Game overrides, it's a good thing to have, and if you don't have any of these things here, you can scroll into your settings and add your stuff because they are currently in my window here. That's why they're not in the settings there. In our output, we're going to make sure that we render this in the desired resolution that we want in After Effects. This is going to be 1920 by 1080 for this sequence, and I'm going to hit the 3 dots right here to set my output directory. I'm going to set this to render in this folder right here, which is the tutorial that you're watching right now. I'm going to hit select folder, hit accept on all these render settings, and we're going to hit render local. It's going to go do its thing. So go get a cup of coffee, go do some jumping jacks, go do something else for a short period, and come back when the render is done.
6.5 hours later.
With the render done, now we can actually dive into bringing this camera animation from Cinema4D or Blender into After Effects. So let's start in Cinema4D. Starting in Cinema4D, I just imported the FBX of the little camera animation, and there's going to be one weird thing of this workflow. Unfortunately, the axis of the camera import with the default settings from Unreal Engine will tilt your camera 90 degrees to the right. It's annoying. It sucks. I get it. I know, and I don't recommend trying to fix it. I only recommend this workflow if you're trying to get an Unreal Engine camera into After Effects and just let it do its thing. It's going to be a little funky, but for some shots, you just have to work with what you got. So with that out of the way, we want to get this into After Effects. The first way I'm going to show you is the free way. Now, there's more room for error with this, so that's why I do recommend the plugin. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to select all of our objects in our outliner up here, right-click, render tags, and Cineware. This is just going to help us get that 3D data into After Effects. The second, we're going to go up to our render settings right here. We need to go to our output right here, make sure that our width and height is our desired output in After Effects, 1920 by 1080. We also have to make sure that we're rendering all frames. And if you don't have all the frames in your range right here, make sure that you change this value until all of your keyframes fit inside this highlighted area. Now, we're going to go to our save option, and you're going to be given an option to save this file. We are not going to be rendering out of Cinema4D, but we do need to set an output directory for the render file. So I'm just going to click on this folder right here and set it. Now, in this elements folder right here for this project, I have a folder called AECs. from Cinema4D, we're going to be creating an AEC file. So I have this folder. Let's just put the render here as like a dummy render file. We'll hit save right here. And now we're going to scroll down in the save settings to compositing project file. Now this will be collapsed, but if you bring it down just like so, we can see that we have a couple options. First, we're going to make sure that we check save. We want to save an AEC file. We want to set our target application to After Effects. If you use something else, obviously set it here. And we want to make sure that we select include 3D data. And this is important because we want to get this 3D data of this object and this camera right here. We're going to hit save project file, and we're going to just delete this old one that I had and just save over it like so. And now if I go over to After Effects, I can see that I have this comp that I was testing. We're going to make a new comp by just clicking on our project window, and because we're actually importing a new file, we actually don't need to make a new comp. We'll just go to import, go to file, and we're going to find that AEC right here. Double click import, and we can see that a new folder was created. If we bring this folder down and we double click on this new pre-comp that was created, we can see that we have a big missing footage thing, which is After Effects looking for the Cinema4D render. We can just delete that. We don't need it. We also don't need it in our project file. And for some reason, it likes to make a camera. I'm just going to delete that. And now we have the two objects just like we had in Cinema4D. So now if I scrub through, we can see that this little null object in the center of our scene is moving towards the camera, which is exactly what we want. Now there's a weird little workflow thing that is worth addressing, and that is the Y rotation is rotated and it's flat. We don't want that. And if we scrub through, we can see that this Y rotation has no keyframes on it. So I'm just going to turn that off and then set this to 90, and now it should be facing the camera like so. Awesome. Now that's a lot of steps, and I don't like steps, so we're going to go over to aescripts.com. We're going to type in AE C4D Pro, and we can see that there is a plugin that will do exactly what we just did in less steps. It is $40. It is worth the time, especially if you're going to be doing this a lot. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go into After Effects and hit Control-N, or Control-N, plugin demo. Now we have our little empty comp. If I go back to Cinema4D and I select these two options, after I install the plugin, obviously, go to the plugin, and I can select these two objects in this little window. If I hold Shift on the keyboard, we can see that it's going to give us some extra options over the export button right here. If I hold Shift, it'll bring all the stuff I have selected into the current pre-comp I have in After Effects. So now I have this scene and this pre-comp populated with those two objects. Now for some reason this plugin does turn off the camera for some reason, but if I turn it on just like so, now I can see that as I scrub through, we are not moving, but if I select this little plane object, we're getting the same thing. It just took less steps. Now, obviously, this plane is really flat and weird, and we don't want that. So I'm going to go into the plane properties by hitting UU, and I'm just going to set this to 1920 by 1080. I'm going to set this to, like, let's say this 50% gray color, just gray color, sure. And I'm going to set the Y rotation to 90, just like that. So now we're getting that object in our scene, and it's filling up the frame. So I like the Cinema4D AE Pro workflow because it's less steps, but up to you. There is a free version, obviously. So with all that out of the way, now let's dive into the Blender workflow. So I have a blank Blender scene here. I'm going to go up to File, Import, scroll down to FBX, and I'm going to find the Portal FBX camera animation. Click Import File, and now we can see that we have our little disk and a dot. Unfortunately, the camera that is imported from Unreal into Blender is about 1% the size of what we would think it would be. So what we have to do is we're going to scroll up our timeline here, and we're going to hit Control-Tab on our keyboard to reveal all of our keyframes. I'm going to bring down this window to reveal all of the properties. I'm going to hide everything but the scale. Turn that back on, and I'm going to select all and hit delete. I don't need those keyframes, and then now we can see that this property on the camera is no longer keyframed, and I'll just set everything to 1, 1, 1. Now the camera is sized correctly, and very conveniently with the Blender workflow, it is also oriented correctly as well, which is super nice for my OCD-ness. I'm going to enable all these keyframes again, and if I go to my view and lock to camera view and actually look through my camera, just like so, I actually don't need that button. I am going to preview, and hey look, we have the camera animation. We're doing a little push forward, and then whoosh. Just like that. Cool. So now what we want to do is select both of these options, and with the new plugin that I do recommend getting, it is going to be Blender AE. If I go to aescripts.com and type in Blender AE, find the plugin. It is $30, and it basically does the same thing as a Cinema4D plugin. You can select your stuff, spit it out into After Effects, and it makes your life very easy. Back in Blender, I do have that plugin installed, so I'm going to go to the window by hitting the N key to bring up my little side menu. And when you don't have this enabled correctly, this won't be filled, but if you do everything correct, then you can just hit connect to the After Effects file, and we can do export to AE with your objects selected. I'm just going to do just that, and now it's going to make a new comp. It's going to basically try and bring all the stuff from Blender into After Effects, and after just a couple seconds we have a new comp, and we can see that we have a very tiny null because for some reason the scaling of this is at 1% or 0.1%, so we'll just set this to 10% just for now, maybe 100 just to make our lives easy. And once again, the rotation of our object is just the Y rotation is at 0 when we want it to be 90. So we can set that back, and now we have the same exact thing, exactly what we wanted. So there's the Cinema4D and the Blender stuff to get our camera into After Effects. Now let's import our composited footage. I just closed Unreal, and now I'm going to make a new comp. I'm going to go to my output folder right here, go to my tutorial, and we'll call this tutorial underscore portal composite. Click OK. Now I have an empty scene. I'm going to go to my empty project file, and I'll just hit Control I to import said footage. Go to footage. Nope. Go to pre-renders. Go to my folder where I have everything saved, and I will do the folder that I want. I remember that it was this folder right here, tutorial for YouTube. Select that and import my EXR sequence like so. We can see, make sure that we have this checked. Hit import, and it's going to import our scene. I'm going to drag this into this composition. I have caps lock on, so now we can see that, hey look, there it is. Now, if you don't know anything about the ACES workflow or color management thing, I do recommend this tutorial up here, which does cover that, but I'm going to be working in the OCIO color managed system, which will basically control all of my color space stuff so that it looks correct in my viewport. Click OK. Like I said, check out my other tutorial on color management in After Effects if you need a little bit more information. So with all that done, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to hit Control-Alt-G with the footage that I just imported selected, and it's going to interpret the footage. We're going to set the color to our desired color space, which is ACES, and it's going to do a slight color shift, but now it should look exactly as we wanted it to. Now this first layer of footage, I'm going to call this portal shot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control-D, and I'm going to duplicate it. And the reason why is I'm going to add an effect. Go to Effects and Presets and type in Crypto Matte. And I'm going to start by dragging this onto this shot. And now everything's going to be weird and gross. And the reason why is because we are basically getting all the information of every single material and object inside our Unreal scene. And the benefit about this effect is now we can create a little mask based on these colors. So with the Crypto Matte object selected, if we see the cursor right here is actually going to be selecting one of these colors. And I know that I want the footage to be on top of this portal right here, so I can click there. And now that's going to turn white-ish. Unfortunately, with the ACES workflow, it is not going to be pure white, so that's a story for another day. And I'm also going to hold Shift, and we can see that the cursor also gets a little plus sign right there. And I'm going to select the particles as well. So now if I were to go to my crypto matte and set this output to matte RGBA, and then I select the solo icon, we can see that we're only isolating the portal right here, which is valuable because now I can actually use this as an alpha channel for my footage. And the reason why this is valuable is because now I can go in and find my footage and drag it into my pre-comp or into this composition. So I'll call this layer portal matte, and then I'm going to drag this below, and I'm going to color code this to like sandstone. Just make it a different color so then you know what's what. We're going to go into this folder and drag in this footage, and now I have this shot in my scene. Now you need to find whatever footage that you need for your project, but all I need to do now is go to my track matte settings and set this to my portal matte just like that, and now we are getting the footage to be only playing on the portal here. If I unsolo that, hey look, we're getting somewhere. Now I'm not going to go through the full compositing process, but we need to bring that camera animation into After Effects and get this all to work correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the pre-comp that I made earlier with the Blender AE tutorial stuff, and I have all this information right here. I'm going to select both objects, Control-Alt-C to copy them. I'm going to go to my main project where I was compositing this footage, Control-Alt-V to paste. And now what I'm going to do is select my footage and set this to a 3D layer. And now with it being 3D, it's doing some weird stuff. But if I go to my parent settings right here and I hold shift and I parent this to the plane, it should snap exactly to that portal. So now we can see that the footage is actually going to be connected to that portal object, which is exactly what we want. Obviously, we have a big issue and the fact that it's way too big, and it's also inverted. Depending on whether you use the Cinema4D or the Blender workflow, you might run into some issues, so this is the point in which you will have to scale it down to fit exactly what you need. And unfortunately, because it is so small and flipped, we are actually going to need to rotate the footage by 180 degrees on the Z, like so. With that rotated, we can then go in and maybe just adjust the position of this just a little bit. And we can see that now we have this little piece of footage locked in exactly where we want it to be in the portal. And it follows the camera animation that we built in Unreal Engine. Now, it is worth mentioning that I did copy the Blender camera information, but if you were to do the Cinema4D workflow, you could just do the very same thing. Control-C, Control-V, copy it in and do the same parenting. The workflow is the same. We really just use Cinema4D or Blender as a medium to communicate between Unreal and After Effects because, unfortunately, After Effects can't import FBX camera information as of January 30th, 2024. Now at this point, it still does look a little flat, and I can't make this tutorial super long because otherwise no one's going to watch it, but what I will share with you is that sometimes in Unreal, you will have to export individual pieces of your scene just by itself. So for example, the crypto matte didn't capture the smoky element of this portal, so what I'm going to do is import this other image sequence that I have right here, and this is the portal of the scene by itself. I did render it on black. You can do transparent renders out of Unreal, but because I know I'm going to set this blending mode to add, it's going to obscure the footage just like that. So now when I turn this off, we can see that it's helping the footage in the scene blend a little more. And the best part about this is now because I have this single object by itself, if I solo it, I can just go into my effects and presets and type in a glow. Now this is a paid plugin and not part of the tutorial, but I do like optical glow that I will just drop in from the Red Giant and Maxon tools. Again, I'm sorry for all the plugins. You can use the default After Effects glow, but I will set this to linear because I know I'm in the Aces color space, and it's going to help blend this just a little bit more. And my favorite part about this glow is I can go into the highlights only and just crank this up to like a much higher number. So now it makes it look a little bit more magical. So I'm going to blow through some of the extra compositing stuff that I would typically do for a scene like this. Not every scene that you do is going to be super perfect. Sometimes you just have to be a little creative. So I'm going to do that, and we can see the final result in just a second. So after about 10 minutes of just fussing with this scene, I made the transition feel a little bit nicer, and all I did was I went into this pre-comp that has the footage in it, and I have this little mask, this triangle mask that kind of fits the shape of the portal already. So it's already sort of in the portal, but then what I do is I just have this mask scale up a little bit, just so that as we move the camera forward into the portal, it sort of fills the frame. And then I took a second copy, a duplicate of that footage, and just cross-faded it up and increased the opacity until we get all the footage. So now what I can do is I can swap out this footage for whatever shot my edit needs for this transition, and I can let this live inside all the edits that I need to moving forward. So this is how I would typically composite a shot in Unreal Engine, bring it into After Effects, and do some fun VFX compositing things. I know this one was a long one, but I hope you learned something. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. I had a lot of fun making this one, and there's some things that I did that are professional and other that are just like, hey, this is just me figuring stuff out and sharing it with the internet. If you'd like to know more about any part of this process, let me know and I can make another tutorial. With that out of the way, I will leave you with the final tip, and that is to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and you will make some. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.